Now, perhaps the most important factor when successfully caramelizing onions is you need a pan that has a heavy bottom. So this works really well in a cast iron skillet. This works really well in like a heavy bottom pan like this. You can see that it's got like a nice thick bottom, or a pan that is like thick all the way around works. What you need here is something that'll hold heat. And actually, you can do this in like one of those cast iron enameled Dutch ovens. Those work really well as well. Although sometimes caramelized onions tend to stain that white enamel, so just be aware of that. The reason you need like a thicker pan is because if the onions come in close contact with the heat, like a really thin pan, they'll burn really quickly. Remember, burning is really close to browning, right? So the goal in caramelizing or browning something is you want to take it just almost to the point of burning, but not all the way there. Because if it burns, then you just throw them away. Because like nobody wants burnt onion jam. That's really gross, right? So if you burn them, if they smell burnt, just don't even bother trying to save it. Just toss them and start over. Or you might be able to actually, if only a very small portion burnt, you might be able to fish it out. But ultimately, like it may have like tainted your entire batch with a burning flavor. One more really important factor I need to warn you about is you cannot do this in a nonstick pan. Like a nonstick pan keeps the onions from sticking, and sticking is browning. I think you've probably heard me say this before. Sticking is browning, and browning is flavor. So sticking, therefore, is flavor. So if you have a nonstick pan, it's not going to stick. Food will turn brown in a nonstick pan because that's just what happens when you heat organic matter. It changes colors, right? But it's not the kind of browning that we're shooting for. We specifically want the kind of browning and caramelization that happens when metal is in contact with food. And if you put a layer of Teflon or ceramic between those two, between the food and the heat, like no sticking will occur. We've got our hot pan here. It's at about a 6 right now, even though we're going to heat it low and slow. Like if you start the pan a little bit hotter, the onions will cook really quickly in the very beginning, which is what we want. Before they start caramelizing, they need to basically like sizzle off all their moisture, right? Because onions are actually really full of water. There's a lot of water in onions. So we're going to take the heat to like a 5 or 6. We're going to cook off that moisture really quickly, and then we're going to turn it down to low and cook it for, I don't know, actually you can cook onions for hours if you want to really, really caramelize them. So we're going to have to see how long these take. Alrighty, we're going to add our oil to our hot pan. We're going to wait. We're actually use a fair amount of oil. And we're going to wait for the oil to shimmer. And when I say it shimmers, it literally looks like there's like little tiny waves in it, right? Like it looks kind of like waves at the beach, like on a calm day at the beach, like the little waves are like lap, lap, lap. So we're going to wait for this to shimmer. It'll also get a lot looser because like this oil was really thick when I first put it in the pan. And you can see it's actually thickened, or it's thinned out a little bit. So now we're going to add our onions. They're going to sizzle. Boop. Break them up a little bit. Break up the onions. If you have any little bits like this that are stuck because the bottom root end is still in there, you can just take those out because they're not going to caramelize very well. But other little bits, like these little round bits, are totally fine. Going to separate. Dun, 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 dun. Here's another end bit. Alrighty, we've got our onions. And now we're just going to push them around until they cook off all their internal moisture. And once they cook off their internal moisture, that's when they're going to start browning. Alrighty, we've cooked our onions down about halfway. You've noticed they've reduced in mass by quite a bit. And this is one instance where I don't mind crowding the pan so much because there's a lot of moisture in here. It's fine. Like they're going to cook down. We need that moisture initially to like reduce the onions. So crowding the pan is fine. And actually these 2 whole onions are going to cook down to like somewhere between a 1/4 cup and a 1/2 cup. I've got some browning here already. And you're going to notice that I have this little tiny cup of water here. Now I want to point something out. Now this pan, or this cooktop has a hot spot right here. Right? And so wherever you have a hot spot on your cooktop stove and in your pan, you're going to notice that things start to brown really quickly. Remember, browning or burning is right behind browning. And so there's a trick for keeping things from burning, right? And so what we do is we take a little bit of water. We're not going to do it right now because we don't need it. And if you see a spot where there's a lot of caramelization, like what you do is you just take this little tiny water cup and you put like 3 or 4 drops of water on that spot where it's kind of caked up and is getting really brown, and you scrape it off with your paddle. And this is one of the reasons why it's really great to use a flat spatula or a flat wooden paddle, because it'll really help you scrape the brownie bits off the bottom. And part of caramelizing onions, once you take them to a lower temperature, is to keep scraping at the bottom. You want those little brownie bits mixed into the onions, right? So Like you'll see a spot where it starts to cake on, and you just like scrape it up, add a few drops of water, which will deglaze that spot, scrape it off a little bit more, and then mix it all into the onions. And you'll notice like you have like little bits and clumps of brown stuff in the onions. It's totally fine because as they cook down, it will just kind of smooth out and it'll mix into the onions and it'll look really good. Now there's a cheat method, and I don't recommend it, but you can do it if you're in a hurry, and that's adding a little bit of sugar. So sugar caramelizes, right? And that's what we're doing, is we're caramelizing. So if you're in a serious hurry and you don't want to wait for these to brown, you can add, like just sprinkle just a little bit of sugar, like a half a teaspoon, quarter teaspoon on top. It'll burn if you don't watch it because sugar burns really quickly. But that'll give you like a little bit of sweetness without having to cook them so long. So I call that kind of the cheater's method. Alrighty, we've got some good browning here. Like not obviously anywhere close to done, but if you look, you can see we're starting to get some color. These onions are looking really good. There's no browning on the bottom of the pan, which is ultimately what we want. The browning here is just the natural like occurrence when you cook onions. What we want is browning on the pan, and that's what we're gonna be adding water to and scraping up and mixing with the onions. So now that these are at a really good stage, we're gonna turn our heat down to 2, and maybe even lower or higher, depending on your oven. You want this to cook really slowly over anywhere from like an hour to 2 hours. This is also kind of a hands-on, hands-off thing, so you don't have to watch it, but you want to check on it every few minutes, right? Because what we're doing is we're encouraging browning, which is really close to burning. And you just kind of go about your business, set a timer for 15 minutes, come back, look. If you see a spot where, you know, it's browning too much, you just drop a little water, literally just a few little drops. That's it. And it won't sizzle because the heat's been turned down, and that'll give you the opportunity to scrape up those little brownie bits. And you want to do that anywhere that you see browning. Like there's not really much browning at the pan right now. I'm doing this mostly to illustrate. But you do that, it deglazes that spot on the pan, and then you just keep mixing together. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to let these cook for a little while, and then we'll be back to check them out.